Princess Talia was considered a disgrace by her family. To get rid of her, they offered her as a sacrifice to the cruel keeper of the tower. What they didn't expect, their failed princess was the only person who could save him. Once every 10 years, the kingdom of Valerian had to pay the price for its protection. At the northern border loomed Ebonstone Tower, home to the immortal keeper, Rhys. His magic was the only thing holding back the monstrous, nightmarish mists of the outside world. In return, the kingdom had to provide an offering. Usually, the offering was gold, ancient manuscripts, or rare artifacts. This year, the king and queen brought a different kind of offering. They arrived at the foot of the tower with the entire royal court. There stood their two eldest daughters, beautiful and healthy, shining in silks, and between them stood Princess Talia. Talia was the youngest daughter, the royal family's shameful secret. She did not possess her sister's beauty. She was thin, pale, and her body was frail, often racked with coughs and fevers. In a court where strength and appearance were everything, Talia was a failure. She spent her days in the library, seen as an embarrassment better hidden than displayed. Today, she wore her finest white dress. Her family had told her it was a ceremony to honor the keeper. She did not know that she was the honor. The king stepped forward and announced his offering to the silent tower. Not gold, not artifacts, but the most precious offering of all, his own blood. His daughter, Princess Talia, to serve and accompany the great keeper. Talia saw it. She saw the relief in her mother's eyes. She saw the hidden, satisfied smiles on her sisters' faces. She finally understood. This was not an honor. This was an exile. They were not offering her because she was precious. They were offering her because she was worthless. She was the embarrassment they could finally discard in a way that looked noble. Her heart broke, but she did not fight. She was too used to being a disappointment, too weakened by illness and grief to rebel. The royal guards escorted her to the looming obsidian gates of the tower. They placed her small bag of belongings at her feet. Then, they retreated. The entire royal procession, her father, her mother, her sisters, turned and walked away without a backward glance. Talia was left alone in the cold silence, in the shadow of the tower. She waited. The gates remained closed. A cold wind blew. She was too terrified to knock, too terrified to leave. After an hour that felt like an eternity, there was a deafening, ancient screech of metal. The 20-foot-tall gates opened on their own, revealing an abyss of darkness within. It was not a welcome. It was a summons. Shaking, Talia picked up her bag. She knew she had nowhere to return to. She stepped over the threshold, into the dark. The gates boomed shut behind her, with a bone-jarring finality, cutting her off from the world forever. The great hall inside was dark and cold. Torches on the walls ignited with ghostly blue flames, revealing dancing shadows. Then, he emerged. Rhys, the keeper, stepped out of the shadows. He was not what Talia had imagined. He was no old, bearded hermit. He looked young, ageless, with eyes as old as the tower itself. And his eyes were filled with rage. He had expected gold. He had expected manuscripts. The kingdom had dared to send him a person. Rhys stared at the small, pale creature trembling before him. He did not see a frightened princess. He did not see a victim. He saw a trap. He saw the kingdom's treachery. He saw a viper sent to seduce him, a spy sent to learn his secrets, or an assassin disguised in weakness. He assumed this woman was a temptress, trained in the arts of manipulation, sent to bring him down from within. The keeper's fury filled the room, cold and deadly. He had accepted the offering, and he hated it. Rhys's fury was so thick it made the blue torches on the wall tremble. He would not play the kingdom's treacherous game. He would not accept this trap, no matter how pathetically it was packaged. He was the keeper of Ebonstone, not a nursemaid. He raised one hand. with a deafening shriek of grinding metal. The massive obsidian gates behind Talia grated open once more, revealing the cold night and the dark wilderness beyond. His command was clear, though unspoken. Leave. Talia looked back at the world that had just cast her out. She felt the biting, cold wind cut through her thin dress. Out there was the father who had betrayed her, and the sisters who despised her. To return meant facing shame, or, worse, a slow death in the palace gutters. Inside the tower was an angry, magical tyrant. She was faced with two horrors, and she had to choose. Slowly, Talia turned away from the open gate. She looked at the furious keeper. Then, she shook her head. In a slow, defeated motion, she crumpled to the cold stone floor, her small bag falling beside her. She hugged her knees and began to weep silently. She would not leave. Rhys was stunned. This reaction confused him. A spy would have fled. An assassin would have attacked. A temptress would have used her wiles. He had not expected this broken, small creature to simply refuse. This raw, unveiled weakness and despair was something he had never encountered. It disgusted him. With an angry jolt of magic, he slammed the gates shut. The boom shook the tower, making Talia flinch. Rhys decided on a new strategy: neglect. If she would not leave, she could rot. The tower was not kind to frail humans. He turned with a swirl of his dark robes and stalked up the main staircase, leaving her alone in the great hall's darkness. Talia was alone, but only for a moment. As soon as the keeper was gone, the tower felt alive. The hall was dark, far larger than it had seemed. The blue torches only illuminated small circles, leaving the unreachable corners in thick, absolute shadow. Then she heard them. The strange noises. They weren't animal sounds. They were whispers that slithered within the stone itself. Echoes of magic, too old to name. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move and lengthen. The air felt heavy, charged with a power she did not understand. A new, more primal fear gripped Talia. This was the fear of the unknown, of the ancient dark. She looked up and saw Rhys's distant silhouette at the top of the stairs, the blue light from his study spilling out behind him. Her fear of the dark, whispering tower was, in the end, greater than her fear of the angry man. At least Rhys was alive. Something she could see. Shaking, Talia got to her feet. She picked up her bag. Her legs felt heavy, but she forced herself to climb the stairs. She began to follow Rhys. She kept a safe distance, 50 feet behind him, close enough to stay in the faint light of the torches he passed, but far enough to not be seen as a threat. Rhys stopped at his library door. He could feel her presence. He did not turn. He could hear her short, frightened breaths. He let out a low huff, a sound of infinite annoyance. Then he swept into his library, leaving the door ajar. Talia stopped at the threshold, daring not to enter. But she also dared not to leave. She sat on the cold stone floor of the hallway, just outside the open door, where she could see the glow from Rhys's fireplace. She had become his stubborn shadow. Talia's first week in the tower was a silent game of cat and mouse. Rhys, the keeper, had resolved to ignore her to death, but the stubborn girl refused to disappear. She was a pale shadow constantly at the edge of his vision. When Rhys went to the vast library, he would sense, minutes later, Talia's trembling presence at the threshold. When he worked in the alchemy lab, he would hear the faint creak of a floorboard in the hall she was hiding just outside. It was driving him mad. His ageless routine, his peaceful solitude, had been shattered by this fragile human presence. He decided to end this game. He would make her leave. That night, Rhys used his magic to make the tower what it truly was, a cold tomb. He extinguished all the magical torches in the corridors, allowing absolute darkness to reign. He let the ancient magic of the tower seep in, dropping the temperature until the stones felt like ice, and he allowed the eerie whispers which he usually dampened to echo through the halls. He returned to his warm study and stoked his fire. He waited. He listened for a scream, for a sob, for the desperate footsteps of her running to the front gate. Nothing came. After an hour, his anger now laced with an annoying flicker of curiosity, he couldn't concentrate. He grabbed a torch and stalked out into the dark, frigid hallway. He found her, just outside his study door. In the last faint patch of light that bled from under his door, Talia was asleep. She was not in a bed. She was curled up on the ice-cold stone floor, in a fetal position, hugging her knees for warmth. She had nothing. No pillow, no blanket. The thin dress she had arrived in was her only protection. She was shivering violently in her sleep. Rhys's first reaction was disgust. How pathetic, how weak. This was proof the kingdom had sent him its most useless creature. He snorted. He turned, fully intending to go back to his warm fire and leave her there. He took one step. Then he stopped. He closed his eyes. Something ancient. Inside him a remnant of the humanity, he thought, had long since died. He could ignore the creature. But the sight of that small body, shivering on the cold floor, it triggered an infuriating sense of pity. With a low, annoyed growl, he snapped his fingers. A thick, heavy fur blanket pulled by magic from an ancient storage chest materialized in the air. It drifted down and gently draped itself over Talia's form. She instantly stopped shivering. She let out a small sigh in her sleep and buried her face in the warm fur. Rhys watched her there. At least she wouldn't freeze to death on his doorstep. He turned to leave again. But he stopped again. The blackness in the hallway was total. He remembered how the girl always flinched at the shadows. With a second, more irritated growl, he snapped his fingers again. A small, magical orb of light, the size of a fist, appeared. It pulsed with a soft, candle-like warmth. Rhys let it hover in the air, a foot above Talia's head, illuminating their small alcove with a calm golden glow. Now, done. He had solved the problem. He went back into his study and shut the door. 10 minutes passed. He couldn't read. He just stared at the fire, irritated. Was she still there? Did she wake up? Did she try to steal the light? He couldn't focus. He wrenched his door open. Talia was still there, fast asleep under the thick blanket, illuminated by the small light. She looked peaceful. Rhys felt a strange, small sense of relief, and that made him even angrier. He slammed the door again. An hour passed. His mind kept drifting back to the hallway. This was ridiculous. He, the keeper of Ebonstone, was being defeated by a sleeping girl. He finally gave up. He realized he would get no peace tonight. He would constantly be worrying, not because he cared, he told himself, but because it was a distraction. With a final growl of defeat, Rhys used his magic. A large, comfortable armchair from the corner of his library floated out of the room, across the hall, and settled itself against the wall opposite where Talia slept. Rhys picked up the book he had failed to read. He conjured a simple warming spell around himself and sat down in the chair, reading by the tower's dim light. He hated the girl for ruining his routine. He hated himself for this weak, human pity. But he was tired of pacing. Tonight, he would sleep in the hallway, in the same room as Talia, just so he could stop worrying and finally get some peace. The night Rhys spent in the hallway chair changed the dynamic between them. He was no longer actively trying to freeze or frighten Talia into leaving. And Talia, having felt the warmth of the fur blanket and seen the magical light that guarded her, no longer saw Rhys as a pure monster. He was still a dangerous and short-tempered man, but he was a man who would not let her freeze to death. There was an awkward, unspoken truce. A new routine formed. Rhys would start his day, irritably stepping over Talia, who was still asleep in the folds of her blanket in the hallway. He would go to the observatory at the top of the tower to observe the border mists, or to his cluttered laboratory to work on potions. And Talia would follow him. she remained his shadow. If Reese was in the laboratory, Talia would sit on the floor at the end of the corridor, just close enough to feel the faint warmth of the alchemical fires. If Reese went to the observatory, Talia would wait on the topmost stair, staring at the vaulted ceiling. Reese, for all his genius, was a deeply chaotic creature. He was a storm of pure thought, heedless of physical order. He would use a rare mortar and pestle, then simply leave it on the floor, stained with sulfur powder. He would pull a book from the shelf, read it while walking, and then abandon it, splayed open, in the hallway. For Talia, raised in the order of a palace and having spent her life in meticulously organized libraries, this chaos made her uneasy. The scholar within her shuddered to see ancient books treated so poorly, but she was too afraid to touch anything. She knew Reese still considered her an interloper, a snake. To touch his things without permission was an unforgivable transgression. The pinnacle of this chaos was the main library. It was Reese's private study and a tomb for thousands of books. One afternoon, Talia followed Reese to the library. As always, she stopped at the threshold, not daring to enter. Reese was in a foul mood. He was looking for something. Talia watched him as he paced between the shelves, snatching a scroll, scanning it, then throwing it to the floor with a frustrated growl. He moved to his massive desk, which was more mountain than table. Stacks of books, blank parchment, days-old wine goblets, and strange magical artifacts piled high. Reese began to dig through the piles. He was looking for one specific scroll. Talia could tell by the sharp focus of his eyes. He searched and searched, his irritation growing with every second. Talia knew exactly where the scroll was. She had noticed it 2 days ago, half buried under a pile of manuscripts on astrology. Reese, unable to find it, roared in frustration. It wasn't a roar of words, but a sound of pure rage. With one furious sweep of his arm, he cleared an entire side of his desk. Books, parchment, and the goblet crashed to the floor. Burying the scroll, he sought even deeper beneath the new chaos. Talia flinched in the doorway, making herself as small as possible. Reese, disgusted, stormed out of the library, brushing right past her as if she were part of the wall. He did not see the cowering Talia. Talia was left alone at the threshold, staring at the mess within. She knew she couldn't clean it now. Reese could return at any moment. And darkness was beginning to fall. As the sun set, the tower became his again. The shadows lengthened, and the ancient whispers returned. Her fear of the dark was far stronger than her desire to tidy. She hurried back to her safe place, the floor outside Reese's study, where she knew the fur blanket would be waiting. But that night, as she huddled under the blanket, a plan formed. She couldn't clean when Reese was awake. She couldn't clean when it was dark. But there was one time. There was a small window. She would wake before Reese. She would use the first light of dawn filtering through the library windows. She would use Reese's fear of an interloper's touch against him. She would set the chaos to rights before the surly guardian even opened his eyes. Reese woke with a jolt. He was in his chair in the hallway. His neck was stiff, and what fragile remnants of his humanity remained ached from sleeping sitting up. Anger immediately flared within him. He had demeaned himself, sleeping in a cold hallway like some pathetic house, all because of the girl. He sprang to his feet, ready to unleash his frustration. But the hallway was empty. The girl Talia was gone. The thick fur blanket he had lent her was folded slightly crooked and imperfect, but clearly, intentionally folded over the chair he had just vacated. The magical orb of light had extinguished, its magic fading with the dawn. A new irritation crept over Reese. She was wondering. The pity he'd felt last night evaporated, replaced by his old paranoia. Of course, he had shown a moment of kindness, and the girl had immediately taken advantage of it. She must be roaming the tower, searching for secrets, touching artifacts she had no right to touch. He had been wrong to be merciful. His snake theory returned in full force. With heavy, angry strides, Reese stalked down the corridor. He didn't need magic to track her. The tower itself told him where life stirred. He tracked her to the place he dreaded most, the library. His study, the very heart of his magic. He prepared to shout. He would drag her out of there and throw her back to the front gate. And this time he wouldn't care if she resisted. He slammed the heavy library doors open. The rage was already on the tip of his tongue, ready to explode.
What are you doing?
The words died in his throat. The library, normally shrouded in dust and darkness, was illuminated by a single, rare shaft of morning light. The tower usually blocked the sun, but at this hour, one high east-facing window caught the dawn, and Talia was standing right in it. She wasn't rummaging. She wasn't stealing. She was holding an old book, her back to Reese, completely absorbed. That morning sunbeam cut through the dancing dust motes in the air. Enveloping her, the light caught her thin hair, turning it into a sort of tangled halo. It highlighted the pale, fragile line of her neck. She wasn't beautiful, certainly not in the way her porcelain doll sisters were. Her face was too thin, her eyes too large. But in that soft morning light, surrounded by ancient tomes, she radiated something else. Not beauty, but an aura of diligent stillness, an aura of quiet life in a dead tower. Reese found himself frozen at the threshold. The rage he had built all morning, the pain in his neck, the irritation suddenly evaporated, leaving a nauseating confusion in its wake. Talia must have sensed his presence. She flinched violently, dropping the book with a soft thud on the dusty floor. She spun around, eyes wide with panic, her lips pale, bracing herself to be yelled at. Reese blinked. The spell was broken. She was the interloper again. She was the problem again. He opened his mouth to berate her for daring to touch his books.
How dare you!
But then, his eyes focused on something else. Something beyond Talia, his desk. His desk, which yesterday had been a mountain of parchment, splayed open books, and the junk he had angrily swept aside, was now organized. The books were stacked neatly. The parchments were sorted, and in the very center of the desk, placed tidily where it was impossible to miss, was the ancient scroll of astrology. The scroll he had been furiously searching for the past 3 days. The scroll he himself had buried beneath his own temper yesterday. He stared at the scroll. Then he stared at the trembling girl by the window. She hadn't been searching for secrets. She hadn't been stealing. She had been cleaning. She had woken up at the crack of dawn, using the only light available, just to tidy his mess. Reese found he truly couldn't be angry now. He didn't even know what to feel. This was a new, alien sensation. Being helped, being seen, being taken care of. He let out a sound like a hoarse growl, unable to form words. He hated this feeling of confusion. He hated that the girl had been right. Without a word, Reese strode across the room past the still frozen in. Talia snatched the scroll from the desk and turned. He stalked out of the library, slamming the door behind him, leaving Talia alone and bewildered in the morning light.